If you've made it this far, then I hope you have seen the creative thinking part 1 exercise. In this one, we focused on creating the drawings, creating our characters using geometric shapes and organic shapes. Well, I'm going to recap real quick. So these are the ones that I came up with. And hopefully you've held on to yours. These are a few other ones. These are our organic shapes. So when I draw them, after I draw the weird shapes, I kind of turn the paper around a lot and see, what does it look like to me? Maybe it looks like something different from a different angle, and that's how I figure it out. So this time around, we are going to decide which one we like the best. So take your drawings and decide one from this sheet and one from this sheet of your favorite character. Then the lesson here will be learning how to redraw it, because drawing a character over and over again is not as easy as you might think. So we're going to learn how to take one of these and recreate them. Are you ready? So first things first, I am going to choose the mouse to begin with. And I'm going to get a thick sheet of paper. This is called Bristol. It's my favorite type. So I use this for watercolor, acrylic, pretty much everything. It's absorbent but sturdy. And you can find this at Michael's or Blick or any one of those kind of stores. There's plenty other types of paper you can use too, but this is a good all-around paper for drawing or painting. That's why I like it. All right, so I'm going to put my mouse character right where I can see it. That's our reference, right? And I'm going to start out with pencil. I can find some. Okay. All right, so what we're going to be doing right now is focusing on how to recreate a character. And this is what cartoonists do, illustrators or people that make actual TV shows. What they do is they have their first image, or the one that maybe they've redrawn this character a couple times and they've worked out the kinks and they found what they really like, but that's the one that they keep and they use for reference all the time. So they make sure that each new drawing looks like the original one so that it stays consistent. All right, so the first big thing is our triangle. Now remember, when you're drawing, it's always best to not press down too hard. Start light, okay? I'm drawing a little harder than that so that you can see, because the pencil line doesn't show up too well on camera. So, all right, next, let's see. The next big shapes would be the ears or the nose. I'm going to go with the ears. So what we want to look at now is not only, so the space that's being used up, that's the positive space. The space around that doesn't have anything in it, that's the negative space. And that space is just as important, so that helps us measure also. So what I'm looking at here is, look, that gap between the ear and the top of the head, that's negative space, but that's going to help us figure out where we're going to put it. So that looks about right. What you can do is you can take a ruler or you can use your pencil or whatever you have available and just say, okay, there's that part is about the same size, a little bit smaller than the ear, and 1, 2, 3, about 3 times the size of the rest of the body. We won't get too nitpicky here, but the other reason we draw light is because, the main reason is because we'll probably be erasing. So you can just sketch in something there and then see if that's about right. Maybe a little bit bigger, just by a tad. But if that's the case, I don't think that this is right. So 1, 2, yeah, not quite 3. So that means I gotta make that a little bit smaller. And same with this. So too big there. Okay, that's pretty close. All right, so I'm gonna draw that in a little bit better now. Another thing, guys, before you start erasing, you want to have your next shape, the right line, in there. A lot of times what happens when you erase it before you put the one that you want to use in there, you end up kind of drawing right in the same spot again. It's real easy to do that by accident. So as much as it might seem weird to draw a shape on top of another shape that you don't want, that is usually the best way to do it. Okay, so we've got our ears. Now we can see that our mouth starts right around the same line, right? And the nose comes down to about halfway, no, more than halfway. See, because that half is longer than that. So let's find the halfway point. Right around there. That's about right, right? See, because this space here, if it's the same size as that pencil, is much bigger than the rest of that space. So that's probably about where our nose actually ends. So I'm going to draw a little oval there, and then a line up to make the snout. Little mouth. Our eyes are right above the nose, and they're pretty close together. We've got a couple little hairs, so 1, 2, 3. Eyebrows are right around where the ears end. We'll put a couple half circles in here. And the other thing with this is, this was our first drawing. So maybe it's not exactly how we want it to be. We can tweak that a little bit in here, but for the most part, we want to try to get that the same because that's what we're practicing this time around. All right, so the paws start a little bit lower than the nose. See, you don't always need a ruler to measure when you're talking about proportions. So when you're comparing something to something else, like let's take this crayon. We don't know what size that crayon is, right? But if we put it next to our eraser, we can say, well, the crayon is longer than the eraser. So we have a measurement based on something else. Again, if we don't have that, we don't know. I guess we could compare it to the paper, we can compare it to the mouse, but it always, you have something to compare it by. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We're comparing the size of the ears to the size of the nose to the size of the body, and that's how we're measuring if you don't have a ruler. But it's also a good practice because you don't need a ruler for that kind of measuring. All right, the tail starts about midway from the ear. So sometimes I draw those, you know how I draw dots? I also draw lines like that. And we can see that the tail comes out past the body and a little bit past that foot. So we don't have that foot in there yet. Let's just sketch that in. And that's around the same size as that paw, kind of. It's not way bigger than the paw, right? So we know that our tail is going to come out a little further. So it's going to fit in that space. And it starts above here. I want to change this a little bit because to me that doesn't look exactly realistic. Now I know you're drawing something different, or maybe you're drawing my character. That's okay too if you want to practice by drawing my character. But I hope that you are drawing your own. And if you are, of course it's going to be different, but you're going to use the same techniques of measuring the proportions of your original drawing to your new drawing. So that's the other thing too. If you want to draw this, mine is bigger than that one, but it's not way bigger. But you could draw it way bigger and the proportions would still be the same. Even though the drawing is bigger, the ears are still going to be the same size as the nose, even if they're bigger. Does that make sense? All right, now we know the size of that foot. And we are going to put that in there. Try to make that the same size as the other one. Okay, we have our simple mouse. The step that I'm gonna do here is to bring in our oil pastels. I'm also gonna show you how to do this with crayon. It's the same thing. On this one, I'm using oil pastel. On the alien, I'm using crayon. Okay, now I get to decide what colors. I want the mouse, when I paint it, I want it to be blue, like a light blue. So I'm gonna take a darker blue and draw, ooh, this is thick, right on top of these lines. Now be careful because oil pastel is oily, as it sounds, and it gets a little smudgy. I'll show you right up here. And when you're doing certain types of artwork, that's what you want the oil pastel for, so you can smudge it. But this time, I don't want that. Because this is so thick, oil pastel usually works out better with a bigger drawing. Because if it's bigger than these lines, even though they're thick, they don't look so huge. But right now they kind of do. All right. I think that's about it for my blue. Wait. And now I want to use some pink. So I'm going to make the outlines darker than how I want to paint it. So for the interior part of the ear, I'm doing pink. And the nose. Also the tail. Oh, I should note too that any erasing that you want to do, you should do before you start drawing with this. It's different than when we used the pen or the marker. If you saw that one, you can erase right over a lot of like the art pens and markers. They're made to be that way, but with this, you can't erase on top of it. So you should really erase as much as you can before you get started if you need to erase. All right. Hair and the eyes. There we go. All right. Oh, no, I still don't. That's, there we go. All right, now I like it. All right, next up we will do some painting. All right, so I've gone and got my cup of water. I've got my paper towel over here that I can dry it off with, and I'm going to use my watercolor. So I'm adding a little bit of water here. And we don't need much. We're keeping it simple. And now I'm going to paint right over that. So, if you ever heard the term like oil and water, because two things don't go together, this is what's happening here. So we have our watercolor, and when you paint it over the oil paints, it slides right off because the oil repels the water. They separate, right? And that's why we've used oil pastels. Because this way, when we paint, we can still see those lines. They're nice and bright, and we don't have to worry about smudging anything with our watercolor. So this is really fun. I don't remember exactly where I learned this technique. I know we used to use it at the studio, but we definitely found it from somebody online first. So we borrowed this idea from another artist who came up with it. It's a really good concept. It works really well when you're just starting out. That way, you know, you still got your drawing and you don't have to focus as much on staying inside the lines. Because those lines are pretty thick. They're easy to stay inside of. All right, I'm rinsing out my brush, adding a little bit more water, and using the pink. I might need a smaller brush, but I'm going to go ahead and try with this one. So now I'm just filling in here. And I mentioned on another video that it's good to let your other color dry before you start the next one so they don't bleed together. But since we have that oil pastel, that creates a barrier, so we don't really have to worry about that. There's not really a chance that they're going to bleed together. Alrighty, check us out. We have our original mouse and our finished character. I hope you really like the way yours turned out too. We are now going to draw our organic shaped creature. or person, whatever you came up with. So your character, we're now going to redraw that. So even though this one is a funky shape, it's not quite as easy to replicate as a triangle or circle or square. We can use the same sort of idea that we did with the last one by measuring the proportions to get it right in our redrawing. So now I've got my sheet of Bristol paper again. I'm going to draw this character right here. So the first thing I'm going to do now is look at the shapes. So he's got, or she, has sort of a rounded face, a rounded head, and a long sort of snake-like body. So what I'm going to do first is draw a circle for the face, and then curve this around, and then from here I'm going to draw a line of action. So think of that kind of like a spine. That's not the whole shape, but that's the line of action that we want to follow when we're drawing the body. So now I'm going to thicken that up. And remember how I just talked about negative space? So I want to look at this negative space in here. Now I'm not thinking about the arm just yet. Let's draw that. And remember there's a little bit of space between the tail and the back of the head. So I want to make sure to leave that room in there. Maybe that's a little bit thicker. I'm just drawing some sketchy lines here. Okay, and we have the overall shape of the body. But before I put in the arms or the scales or anything else, I want to double check and make sure this is around the right size. Just looking at it, I can tell that the head shape is a little bit off, and the body might need to be a little bit bigger. So we pick one thing that we say, okay, this is the size I want this to stay, and then we use that to measure everything else. So if we want the body to be around the size that it is, I'm going to take a look at this. So let's say from that spot here over. It's that long. That's the same as my pencil. And all the way to the top of the head from that line is almost the same. So I'm going to do the same thing over here. So I decide that this is the size that I want this body to be. And I know the head should be the same size. So actually I've got that pretty close. If anything, that actually needs to be a little bit bigger. I thought it was going to be smaller. And now looking at this, we can see if we drew a line straight up, the head comes out a little bit past that belly. So right now that's correct too. All right. The next thing is this shape back here. So I think, all right, so I'm going to measure from the end of this tail here to the stomach. Now, what do I compare it with? So that size compared to here. Okay. So it's a little, it's like halfway into the head. I know this gets a little bit crazy, but let's see. When we don't get this right away, this sort of thing just takes practice. So I'm just going to make that a little bit bigger, not by much. And I've got about what I want. Okay. So that's pretty good. I'm feeling pretty good about that. I'm just going to curve that a little bit more. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and erase this line here. And the next big step would be to put that mouth in there. All right, so let's see. The mouth ends right around here. And right across, because the arms, your arms, right, they're on the same plane, or they should be. Everything is okay. Those are our major components. So now I feel like I've got my shapes just about right. Everything's kind of in the right place. Let's put those eyes in there just to make sure. Okay. All right, so I can see something still that I would like to sort of fix. But this is basically our guy. I'm going to call him Randall. Or Ronald. Yeah, I feel like Ronald. Okay. Now, the other thing is, there's a lot to be said for, remember with these, we just kind of moved our arm around and came up with some crazy shapes. So sometimes it can get a little bit too stilted or feel too confined when you're just measuring stuff. So just measure to begin with, and then go back and just try to replicate those same sort of strokes that you did before, like one kind of fluid motion. Like we did with our sea creature drawings, we are drawing right over those old lines, and I'm pressing down a little bit harder this time. Now, I haven't moved over here yet because some of our spikes are kind of overlapping. So the ones that are on the body that don't go out past the body necessarily, I'm going to start with those first and then work my way out. So I've got kind of curved triangles here. We've got 4. One out here, and then let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This one starts right over here, and this one starts back kind of right around where that one is. So that's, and then we need 5 in between. So I'm just going to kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So these are like fingers. Do you ever have that problem where you go to draw some hands and you start drawing the fingers and they start out one size and then they either get really skinny or really fat because you're trying to fit them in the right space? That's the kind of thing that this measuring the proportions helps with. And like I was just sort of sketching these out first because I don't want to draw too hard because I don't know if that's exactly where I want them to end up. All right, it's good for now. All right, so for our next character, we are going to be using the same sort of technique, but we're going to use a different medium. So this time we're using acrylic paint with crayon. So it's slightly different, but you're getting the same effect. So what I've done here is I've taken a mostly clear cup. It's an old gelato container, and I've filled it with water. And I'm going to take some craft paint and add a little bit in there. So you can see it's not too much. Just enough to kind of tint that water and get it sort of thickened up. Just a bit. All right, so if you have acrylic paint and that's what you want to work with, this is how you do more of like a watercolor effect with acrylic paint. So a lot of water, a little bit of pigment, and there you have it. So a little demo before our next step. Okay, so the next step I'm going to do now that I've outlined this a little bit heavier than I did before is I'm going to lightly erase over everything. That way my final lines should show up a little bit more, but I'm getting rid of those sketchy lines. All right, and I mixed up some red paint, so I'm going to use the red crayon for outlining. Before I finish this section, I'm going to outline these parts a little bit differently. So I'm going to make the spikes yellow. Okay, and I'm going to pick a different color here for the tongue. And I'm going to use that purple for the eyes and the eyebrows also. Okay, I'm going to go back to this, mix it back up a little bit in case it's separated at all, and start to fill in Ronald. So here we go. And this is a little bit less messy than the oil pastel. The crayon doesn't smudge, but that wax of the crayon keeps this separated. So we still see the crayon lines and we can paint right over them. You have made it to the end of the video. You did an awesome job. I hope you have fun making these with me, well, your own. And hopefully you learned something new and cool that you can use over and over. So I love to see some of the characters that you create. Send me some pictures of your awesome stuff. I'll see you soon.